He took my team on a Thursday morning at 8:47 a.m. while I was in the bathroom washing coffee stains out of my blouse because apparently the universe has a sense of timing sharper than a bankruptcy. Lawyer's suit. I walked back to my desk expecting to find the usual chaos of Q3 planning spreadsheets and vendor complaints. Instead, I found Jaxon Kellmore standing behind my chair like he owned it. Arms crossed, wearing that smirk that screamed trust fund baby with a business degree from Daddy's alma mater. He was holding a printout and talking to my team. My team. The people I'd trained through 2 system migrations, 3 leadership changes, and 1 particularly brutal audit season where we survived on energy drinks and spite alone. "Hey everyone," he said in that tone that sounds friendly but tastes like artificial sweetener. "Just wanted to let you know there's been a restructuring effective immediately. You'll all be reporting to me." I felt my stomach drop through the floor and keep falling like it was aiming for the Earth's core restructuring. That's corporate speak for, "We're screwing you over but making it sound like a favor." Jaxon caught my eye and his smile widened. Not the kind of smile you give a colleague, the kind you give roadkill right before you back up and hit it again. "Sorry about the timing," he said, like he was apologizing for running late to lunch. But leadership felt this would streamline operations. The team looked between him and me, confusion written across their faces like they were watching their parents announce a divorce. Nobody asked for Emma, my best analyst, the one who caught that billing error that saved us $40,000 last quarter. Raised her hand tentatively. "What about our current projects?" Jackson's voice was smooth as motor oil and twice as slippery. "All projects will transition seamlessly. Don't worry. I'll be bringing you up to speed, and just like that. 4 years of relationship building, 4 years of late nights and early mornings, 4 years of proving that a team could be more than the sum of its spreadsheets, got handed over to a guy whose biggest accomplishment was not getting fired from his last 3 positions. But here's the thing. If you've been following my channel for any amount of time, you know I don't fold easy, so smash that subscribe button because this story is about to get messy, and I mean legally, beautifully, catastrophically messy." That night, I sat in my car in the company parking lot, engine off, windows cracked, listening to the rain tap against the windshield like Morse code, spelling out betrayal over and over. I called my husband, told him what happened. He listened in that way spouses do when they know their partner is about to do something either brilliant or felonious, maybe both. Then he asked the question that's been echoing in my head since "You gonna let him get away with it?" I stared at the glowing windows of the office building where Jaxon was probably already rearranging my team's seating chart, and I smiled for the first time all day. Not if I have anything to say about it, but revenge. Like good wine and quarterly reports takes time to ferment properly. You can't just storm back in swinging. You have to be strategic, surgical, precise. You have to know where the bodies are buried, and lucky for me, I'd been digging graves in that company's backyard for years. See what Jaxon didn't know. Couldn't know because he'd never bothered to look beyond the surface. Was that I wasn't just managing a team. I was managing relationships. And in the cutthroat world of enterprise sales, relationships are currency. I'd spent 4 years building bridges with our biggest accounts, learning their pain points, their budget cycles, their decision makers' coffee preferences. I knew which CFO had a gambling problem, which procurement manager was looking to jump ship. And most importantly, I knew every single weakness in every single contract we'd ever signed, especially the crown jewel, the account that represented 37% of our regional revenue, the account that Jaxon just inherited without knowing the first thing about how to keep it happy. Meridian Global Solutions, our biggest fish. the whale that made everyone else look like guppies, and they were 3 months out from their annual contract renewal. The contract I'd been nurturing for 2 years, the contract that required a very specific touch because their CEO, Veronica Ashford, was exactly the kind of person who would burn a vendor relationship to the ground if she smelled even a hint of complacency or incompetence. And Jaxon, well, Jaxon had never met a subtle approach he couldn't bulldoze through with confidence and a PowerPoint deck. I spent that weekend in my home office mapping out what I knew about every account, every contact, every vulnerability. It was like forensic accounting, but for professional warfare. I pulled call logs, email chains, meeting notes, everything I'd accumulated over 4 years of being the person everyone forgot was in the room until something went wrong by Sunday night. I had a battle plan, and by Monday morning, I was ready to implement phase 1. The beautiful thing about being underestimated is that people stop watching you. They assume you'll slink away, lick your wounds, maybe update your LinkedIn with some passive-aggressive post about new opportunities, but they don't expect you to stay. They definitely don't expect you to start making phone calls, especially not to their biggest clients at 9:15 a.m. I dialed the direct line for Veronica Ashford's office, not the main switchboard, not the customer service line, the private number she'd given me 18 months ago when their system integration nearly imploded, and I spent 3 consecutive nights on emergency calls, making sure their Q4 numbers didn't crater. Veronica picked up on the second ring, which told me 2 things. She still had my number saved, and she was expecting problems. "Good morning, Veronica," I said, keeping my voice light, professional. I wanted to touch base about the upcoming renewal discussions. I know transition periods can be challenging, and I wanted to make sure you had my direct contact. If any concerns come up, there was a pause. Not the kind of pause that means someone's checking email, the kind that means they're processing information that doesn't quite add up. "Transition period?" she repeated slowly. I wasn't aware there was a transition. I took a breath deeper than the Mariana Trench and delivered the line I've been practicing since Saturday afternoon. Unfortunately, there have been some internal changes. Jaxon Kellmore will be taking over your account moving forward, but I wanted to personally ensure continuity during the handoff. Another pause longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had that edge that procurement managers develop right before they start canceling contracts. "I see, and you're calling me personally because you wanted to ensure continuity," she said, the word like it tasted spoiled. "That's exactly right. I've been working on some strategic initiatives for your renewal, and I didn't want any details to slip through the cracks during the transition. I can brief Jaxon thoroughly. But I thought you should know that there might be a learning curve while he gets up to speed." The silence stretched long enough for me to question whether I'd overplayed my hand. Then Veronica spoke, and her voice was ice cold. "Who made the decision to remove you from our account?" I almost smiled. Almost without going into internal politics. Let's just say leadership felt a change would be beneficial, but don't worry. I'm committed to making sure the transition is smooth. I heard typing in the background, the sound of someone making notes that would later become problems for people who weren't me. "I see," she said. "Well, I appreciate the heads up. I'll definitely want to meet with this Jaxon person soon to discuss our expectations." And that's when I knew phase 1 was complete. I'd planted the seed of doubt. The suggestion that maybe, just maybe, this transition wasn't going to be as seamless as everyone hoped. Now all I had to do was wait for Jaxon to water it with his own incompetence. The call with Veronica was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, I made similar calls to every major account holder, not to poison the well that would have been unprofessional, but to plant tiny seeds of concern about continuity, about service levels, about whether the new management structure would maintain the same attention to detail they'd grown accustomed to. I framed every conversation as helpful transition support, making sure they knew who to contact if issues arose, ensuring they felt heard during a period of change. But what I was really doing was setting up a feedback loop. Every question they asked Jaxon, every concern they raised, every moment of hesitation would get back to leadership, and leadership doesn't like it when 37% of regional revenue starts asking uncomfortable questions. Meanwhile, Jaxon was doing exactly what I expected him to do. Everything wrong. He scheduled a kickoff meeting with Meridian Global for the following Thursday, sent out a calendar invite with the subject line, Strategic Partnership Optimization Sync, which is exactly the kind of buzzword soup that makes serious business people want to throw their laptops out windows. I knew this because Emma, my former analyst, who was now technically Jaxon's analyst, but still loyal to the person who actually trained her, forwarded me the meeting agenda. It was a masterpiece of corporate nonsense. Value proposition, alignment, deep dive, strategic synergy, assessment, optimization, roadmap, presentation, reading. It felt like watching someone load a gun with their own foot as the target. But here's the thing. I couldn't just sit back and watch. I needed to be strategic. I needed to position myself not as a saboteur, but as a concerned professional who just happened to be available when things inevitably went sideways. So I did something that would either make me look prescient or insane. I scheduled a meeting with our VP of Sales, Trevor Hawkins, for the day after Jaxon's Meridian presentation. The subject line, Proactive Account Management Strategies, which was vague enough to avoid suspicion, but specific enough to get on his calendar. Trevor was the kind of middle manager who lived in constant fear of anything that might make him look bad to the C-suite. And 37% of regional revenue developing trust issues definitely qualified as something that might make him look bad. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday gathering intelligence through the informal network. Every office has the assistants who overhear everything, the IT guys who see all the email traffic, the facilities manager who knows which conference rooms are being booked for emergency meetings by Wednesday evening. I had a clear picture. Jaxon was panicking. The Meridian presentation wasn't going well in rehearsals. He'd been asking Emma to explain account history he'd never bothered to learn. He'd even asked someone in marketing to help him understand the difference between a service level agreement and a master service agreement, which is like asking someone to explain the difference between a car and transportation. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Thursday arrived like a storm you can see coming but can't do anything to stop. I didn't attend the Meridian meeting, obviously, but I didn't need to. The aftermath was loud enough to hear from 3 floors away. Emma texted me at 11:47 a.m. Just one word. Yikes at 12:23. Someone from Meridian's team called our main line asking to speak with someone who understood their contract history at 1:15. Trevor Hawkins sent an email to half the executive team with the subject line, Need to discuss client concerns immediately, and at 2:30. Jaxon walked past my desk looking like someone had explained mortality to him using hand puppets and a bankruptcy filing. Friday morning, 9:00 a.m. sharp. I walked into Trevor's office carrying a folder thick enough to stop small caliber rounds and an expression that said, "I told you so," without actually saying it. Trevor looked like he'd been surviving on coffee and antacids for the past 18 hours, which based on the timeline he probably had morning. Trevor, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Thanks for making time. I know things have been busy. He rubbed his eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like an accountant having an existential crisis. Busy, he repeated. That's one word for it. Meridian called this morning. They want to discuss concerns about account management transition. I nodded sympathetically. These transitions can be challenging, especially with strategic accounts like Meridian. They've grown accustomed to a certain level of service continuity. Trevor leaned forward. What exactly did they say? I opened my folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper notes from my conversation with Veronica 2 weeks earlier, carefully edited to focus on the professional concerns she'd raised about transition management and service consistency. Nothing unexpected, I said, sliding the paper across his desk. They wanted reassurance about continuity. They asked some questions about the account management transition timeline. They expressed interest in understanding how the new structure would maintain service levels. Trevor read the notes twice, then looked up at me like I was holding the answer key to a test. He'd already failed. They asked all these questions 2 weeks ago. I nodded. I thought it would be helpful to give them a heads up about the transition. You know how Veronica can be about communication? She appreciates being kept in the loop. His eyes narrowed slightly, and you didn't think to mention this conversation to anyone? I kept my voice steady. Professional? I documented it in my transition notes. I assumed Jaxon would review those as part of his account. Prep. The silence that followed was the sound of a man realizing he'd been outmaneuvered by someone he'd underestimated. Trevor cleared his throat. What would you recommend for managing the situation moving forward? I've been waiting for this question for 2 weeks. I kept my expression neutral, helpful even well, given the complexity of the account and the upcoming renewal. I think we need to consider a collaborative approach. Jaxon brings fresh perspective to the relationship. But Meridian values continuity and institutional knowledge. Maybe a co-management structure for the transition period? Trevor's relief was visible. He'd found a way to fix the problem without admitting he'd created it. What would that look like? I pulled out another sheet from my folder, already prepared. You could position me as a senior account advisor supporting the transition. I'd work with Jaxon to ensure smooth handoff while maintaining the relationship continuity. Meridian expects it's temporary just until everyone's comfortable with the new structure. Trevor was nodding before I finished talking. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. He paused. How soon could you start? I smiled. Not too wide. Just enough to look professionally satisfied. I'm available immediately. And just like that, I was back in the game. Not as the lead account manager, that title still belonged to Jaxon, but as the senior advisor, the institutional knowledge keeper, the person Meridian actually trusted to get things done. But I wasn't done. Not even close, because what came next was where things got really interesting. See, while Jaxon had been fumbling his way through PowerPoint presentations and buzzword bingo, I'd been doing something much more strategic. I'd been building relationships outside our company. Relationships with people who had the power to make Jaxon's life very, very complicated. Remember when I mentioned that Veronica Ashford wasn't the type to tolerate incompetence? Well, what I didn't mention was that Veronica sits on the board of the Regional Technology Consortium, a trade organization that represents about 60% of our potential client base, and she talks to other board members about vendor performance, especially when that performance is disappointing her. The beauty of the consortium is that it's not officially connected to any individual company. It's a networking organization, a professional development group, a place where senior executives gather to share best practices and discuss industry trends. and occasionally to warn each other about vendors who seemed to be having internal problems. I'd been attending consortium events for 3 years, not as a sales rep, but as a thought leader, someone who contributed to industry discussions about emerging technologies and service delivery models. I'd presented twice at their annual conference. I'd served on 2 committee panels, and I'd built genuine professional relationships with people who collectively controlled about $40 million in annual technology spending. Jaxon had never heard of the consortium, which was about to become a very expensive oversight. 2 weeks after my conversation with Trevor, I received an email that made my day, possibly my entire quarter. It was from the consortium's program committee, inviting me to moderate a panel discussion at their upcoming quarterly meeting. The topic: navigating vendor transitions. Best practices for maintaining service excellence during organizational change. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. I accepted immediately and began preparing for what would become the most professionally destructive 45 minutes of Jaxon's career. The panel was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at the downtown Marriott Conference Center. I arrived early, wearing my best navy suit, carrying a leather portfolio that contained 37 slides of carefully curated case studies, examples, and best practices for managing vendor transitions without destroying client relationships. The audience was exactly who I expected: senior executives, procurement managers, technology directors, people who made decisions about which vendors got contracts and which got shown the door. Veronica was there, of course, sitting in the third row, taking notes like she was planning to use them as evidence later. Next to her was Marcus Chen, the CTO of Apex Manufacturing, our second largest account, and behind them was a collection of faces I recognized from years of networking events. People who collectively represented more business than our entire regional office could handle in 2 years. I began the panel with a simple question: how many of you have experienced a vendor transition that created more problems than it solved? Nearly every hand in the room went up. The discussion that followed was beautiful in its devastation, without mentioning a single company name. Without violating any confidentiality agreements, without saying anything that could be construed as unprofessional, I guided the conversation through a series of case studies that perfectly described every mistake Jaxon had made in the past month. We discussed the importance of institutional knowledge in vendor relationships, the dangers of prioritizing organizational efficiency over client continuity, the warning signs that indicate a vendor is experiencing internal problems that might affect service delivery. The audience ate it up. They asked questions, shared their own horror stories about vendors who had promised seamless transitions and delivered chaos instead. By the time I wrapped up the session, I'd essentially provided a roadmap for identifying and avoiding exactly the kind of service disruption that Jaxon represented. But the real masterstroke came during the networking reception that followed. Marcus Chen approached me at the bar where I was ordering a club soda and lime. Professional but approachable, great session, he said. I've been thinking about our upcoming renewals, and some of the points you raised really resonated. Thank you, I replied. I think we all learned something about the importance of vendor stability and client communication. He nodded thoughtfully. Speaking of which, I've been meaning to reach out about our account. I've heard there have been some changes on your team. I kept my expression neutral but interested. There have been some internal restructuring, but the core commitment to client service remains unchanged. He didn't look convinced. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss our renewal early this year, make sure we're aligned on expectations and service levels. The phone call started the next morning. Trevor, first, of course, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. We need to talk, he said. Meridian wants to schedule an emergency review meeting, and Apex Manufacturing just moved up their renewal timeline by 6 months. Then came a call from our regional director asking about the consortium panel and whether I thought it would be beneficial for other team members to participate in similar industry events. Code for we need you to be the face of this region because our current approach isn't working. And finally the call had been waiting for Jaxon himself, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Hey, I was wondering if we could grab coffee. I think I could use some advice about account management best practices. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The coffee meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at a neutral location, a Starbucks halfway between the office and nowhere important. I arrived first, ordered my usual, and claimed a table near the window where I could watch Jackson's car pull into the parking lot and see the exact moment he realized this conversation wasn't going to go the way he'd hoped. He walked in, looking like someone who discovered that confidence and competence were not actually the same thing. Ordered something complicated with extra shots and sat down across from me with the expression of a man who'd just realized he was in over his head. Thanks for meeting with me, he said, stirring his drink like it contained the answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. I've been thinking about our conversation from a few weeks ago about account management strategies. I nodded encouragingly. Account management is definitely an evolving field. There's always something new to learn. He looked around the coffee shop like he was checking for witnesses, then leaned forward. I think I might have underestimated the complexity of some of these relationships. The learning curve has been steeper than I expected. I maintained my professional expression while internally celebrating the fact that he'd just admitted what everyone already knew. Particularly with Meridian, he continued. They seem to have very specific expectations about communication and service delivery. I've been trying to understand their history with our company, what they value most in a vendor relationship. And there it was, the admission I'd been waiting for the moment when someone who'd taken my team and my territory had to ask for my help to keep from completely destroying what I'd built. I kept my voice neutral, professional, helpful. Of course, I'd be happy to support the transition in any way that makes sense for the business. What specific areas do you think would benefit from additional context? He pulled out a notebook and I realized he'd actually prepared for this conversation, which was more preparation than he'd done for anything else in the past month. Well, Meridian for starters, I know their renewal is coming up, and Veronica seems to have very particular communication preferences and Apex Manufacturing. Marcus Chen has been asking a lot of questions about account management changes. I nodded thoughtfully. Client relationships are definitely built on trust and consistency. Any major changes can create uncertainty. It's important to address concerns proactively. He looked relieved, like someone had just thrown him a life preserver. Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. So maybe we could set up regular strategy sessions where you could help me understand the best approach for each account. I pretended to consider this, like it wasn't exactly what I'd been maneuvering toward for weeks that could work. I said slowly, we'd want to make sure the approach is coordinated and that clients see a unified strategy. It might be helpful to position it as expanded account support rather than transition assistance, less likely to create concerns about service continuity. His relief was visible. Thank you, he said. And for the first time since this started, he sounded genuinely grateful. I know the situation has been complicated, and I appreciate your professionalism about the whole thing. I smiled. The kind of smile that could mean anything. You're welcome. The business always comes first. And the next few weeks unfolded like a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as professional development. I began meeting with Jaxon twice a week, ostensibly to provide account context and strategic guidance, but really to document every decision he made, every approach he took, every mistake he was about to repeat. Meanwhile, I was having completely different conversations with the actual clients. Conversations where I listened to their concerns, provided reassurance about service continuity, and gently suggested that any feedback about account management approach should be shared directly with our team. These weren't inappropriate conversations. They were legitimate business discussions between industry professionals who happened to have existing relationships. But the cumulative effect was that I became the person clients trusted to understand their needs, while Jaxon became the person they had to work with. Because of organizational structure, 3 weeks into this arrangement, Trevor called me into his office for what he described as a strategic planning discussion. The look on his face suggested it was more like a crisis management meeting. He had printouts scattered across his desk. Quarterly reports, account status updates, and what looked like client feedback forms. The good news is that our account retention is holding steady, he said, gesturing at the papers. The concerning news is that we're getting feedback suggesting that some clients would prefer different account management approaches. I sat down and arranged my expression into something between interested and concerned. What kind of feedback specifically? Trevor picked up one of the forms. This is from Meridian. They've requested that you be included in all strategic planning discussions. Going forward, they specifically mentioned institutional knowledge and relationship continuity. He picked up another form, and Apex Manufacturing has asked whether you'd be available to lead their renewal planning process. They said they'd prefer to work with someone who understands their history with our company. I nodded thoughtfully. Institutional clients do value continuity, especially during transition periods. It makes sense that they'd want to maintain some connection to established relationships. Trevor rubbed his temples like he was developing a headache. In real time. The thing is, this puts us in an awkward position. Organizationally, Jaxon is supposed to be the lead account manager, but clients are specifically requesting you for strategic discussions. I pretended to consider this like it was a complex problem instead of exactly the situation I'd been engineering. I understand the challenge. Maybe we could formalize the arrangement. I could serve as senior strategic advisor for institutional accounts that way. Jaxon maintains operational responsibility, but clients have access to institutional knowledge for planning purposes. Trevor's relief was immediate and obvious. That could work. He said, "That could definitely work. Would you be willing to take on that expanded role?" I smiled. Not too wide. Just enough to look professionally pleased to help. I'm always willing to support what's best for our clients and our team. The promotion was announced the following week. Senior Strategic Advisor, Institutional Accounts. A newly created position that came with a salary bump, a better office, and direct access to our most important clients. Jaxon kept his title and his team. But I got something better. I got influence, respect, and the satisfaction of knowing that I'd turned a professional betrayal into a career advancement. The announcement email was a masterpiece of corporate diplomacy. We're pleased to announce an expanded account management structure designed to provide enhanced service to our institutional clients. This new approach combines fresh operational leadership with deep institutional knowledge to ensure continuity and innovation in our client relationships, reading between the lines. It said, "We screwed up the transition, but we found a way to fix it without admitting. We screwed up 6 months later." I was sitting in the conference room that had once been the site of my humiliation, watching Jaxon present quarterly results to a room full of senior executives. The numbers were good, not great, but good enough to avoid uncomfortable questions about account management effectiveness. He'd learned to lean on my strategic guidance, and I'd learned to guide him toward decisions that made both of us look competent after the meeting. I walked back to my new office, the one with the window and the door that actually closes, and I pulled out my phone to check my calendar. Tomorrow's schedule included a strategic planning call with 3 potential new clients, a consortium board meeting where I'd been invited to present on industry best practices, and a collaboration session with Jaxon to discuss our Q4 account management strategy. I'd gone from having my territory stolen to having more territory than I'd ever managed, and I'd done it without compromising my integrity, without violating any policies, and without burning any bridges that I might need to cross again later that evening. As I was packing up to leave, I got a text from my husband. "How'd the quarterly review go?" I smiled as I typed back. "Better than expected. Much better than expected." Because here's the thing about territorial warfare. The goal isn't just to win back what you lost. The goal is to win so completely that losing becomes impossible, and sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just being so damn good at what you do that the people who underestimated you have no choice but to promote you. Thanks for watching, you territorial warriors. Hit that subscribe button. And remember, when someone steals your territory, don't just take it back. Take theirs too, but do it with such style that they thank you for the lesson.